I got the letter on a Thursday. No return address, just my name, Jason Mercer, written in bold, blocky letters on the envelope. The paper inside smelled faintly of incense and something older, like dust that had never seen sunlight. The message was typed, short, and to the point. You've been selected for overnight custodial work at St. Elias Chapel in Ashbrook. Midnight to 4 a.m. Compensation, $2,000 per week. No experience necessary. First shift begins Friday. Do not arrive early. Do not stay late. No phone number. No contact name. Just a time, a place, and an offer too strange and too good to ignore. I should have thrown it away. A sane man would have. But sanity and desperation don't always live in the same house. Rent was overdue. My car was dying. I hadn't had a steady job in 6 months. And there was something else, something I don't talk about much. A part of me that wanted to be punished, or maybe forgiven. So I packed a flashlight, a thermos of coffee, and a pocket-sized New Testament I hadn't opened in years. Just in case. Ashbrook wasn't on most maps. One of those forgotten Appalachian towns that always seemed one flood away from disappearing entirely. The kind of place where time hung heavy in the air, and people spoke in whispers, even in broad daylight. The drive took longer than I expected. Roads grew thinner, darker, swallowed by trees that bent low over the path like they were trying to hide it. My GPS died halfway there. Not lost signal, died. When I finally arrived, St. Elias stood like something out of an old oil painting. Stone walls blackened with age, tall spires reaching into the fog, wooden doors as thick as vaults. It was quiet. Too quiet. Even the crickets stayed away. I checked my watch, 11:56 p.m. For more minutes. I waited in my car, engine running, eyes fixed on the doors. My fingers tapped nervously on the steering wheel. Then, at exactly 12:01, the doors creaked open on their own. Inside, the air was colder than it had any right to be. Not the kind of cold you feel in your skin, the kind that wraps itself around your bones. The chapel was dimly lit by tall, flickering candles. No electricity, it seemed. The walls were covered in old paintings of saints and martyrs. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I stepped in. That's when I met him, David Linwood. He stood by the pulpit, dressed in a long black coat, hands folded like he'd been waiting years just to see me. Pale skin, hollow eyes, a smile that felt more like a warning than a welcome. Jason Mercer, he said without asking. Right on time. His voice was smooth, low, like someone reading bedtime stories at a funeral. Yeah, got the letter, I said, already regretting this. Is this the right place? He nodded. St. Elias welcomes those who arrive on time. Only those. There was a long silence before he turned and pointed down a narrow hall behind the altar. Closet at the end, he said. Your supplies are in there. You'll find a list of rules posted on the inside of the door. Read them. Obey them. That's all we ask. I should have asked more questions. I should have left. But instead, I nodded like an idiot and walked down the hall. The janitor's closet was cramped, lined with rusted tools, buckets, a mop that looked older than me. Hanging on the inside of the door was a yellowed piece of parchment, tacked up with iron nails. The words were written in red ink, or something that looked like ink. It read, Rules for the night janitor. Do not arrive before 12:01 a.m. Do not stay after 4 a.m. Do not open the west door under any circumstance. If the bells ring at 3:06, hide. If you see children, do not speak to them. If David asks what you saw, lie. At first I laughed. Out loud. But the laugh died in my throat when I looked down and saw my reflection in the mop water. The first time I stepped into St. Elias Chapel as its midnight caretaker, the world felt tilted, like walking into a dream you weren't supposed to remember. The air was cold, not from lack of heat, but something older than that. A deep cold that seeped into the bones and whispered, You don't belong here. I stood in the foyer just past 12:01 a.m., key still trembling between my fingers. The great wooden doors groaned shut behind me on their own. Not slammed, just slow and deliberate, like the building itself had taken a breath. The floor was made of smooth, dark stone, and it echoed under my boots with each step I took toward the sanctuary. Candles lined the edges of the pews, already lit somehow, even though I hadn't touched a match. The flames didn't flicker. They stood perfectly still, like frozen drops of fire. David had left a small wooden desk for me just inside the old janitor's closet, along with a mop, a rusted metal bucket, and a yellowing parchment nailed to the wall. The rules. There were 6 of them, written in strange, jagged handwriting that felt like it had been scratched into the paper with a blade instead of ink. Enter only after 12:01 a.m. Leave before 4 a.m. Do not answer if someone knocks twice and whispers your name. Avoid the confessional booth between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m. Do not look into the mirror after 2:13 a.m. If the bells ring at 3:06, hide immediately. If David asks what you saw, lie. I read them once. Then again. Then a third time, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The strange part wasn't the content. It was the way they made sense to some part of me I didn't know existed. The clock on the far wall struck 12:15 a.m. I shook off the unease, grabbed the mop, and got to work. The floor was clean. Too clean. I swept it anyway, pushing water around that didn't seem to dry. As I moved past the third pew, I noticed a deep scratch on the floor, as if someone had dragged something heavy, something resisting, toward the altar. I didn't ask questions. Not out loud. About an hour into my shift, I passed the old confessional booth. Its wood was darker than the rest of the church, stained almost black. The door was cracked open just enough to see that the inside was pitch black. No shadows. No detail. Just absence. Like light didn't want to go in. I didn't look in. I just kept walking. At 2:03 a.m., I felt it. A shift in pressure. The air turned dense, like I was standing under deep water. The candles suddenly bent toward me, flames leaning like they were trying to whisper something. Then came the knock. 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 Soft. Barely there. But too real to ignore. My spine straightened. Jason. My name. Spoken just behind the door. A woman's voice. Familiar, almost gentle. It sounded like my mother. But my mother died 5 years ago. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice repeated itself, just a little more pleading this time. Jason, please let me in. I backed away slowly, gripping the mop handle like it could protect me. It didn't knock again. I spent the next 20 minutes sitting in the supply closet, lights off, trying not to scream. But the worst part came at exactly 3:06 a.m. The bells. They didn't chime like church bells should. There was no melody, no rhythm. Just one long, low, metallic groan that rattled the walls and shook dust from the ceiling. I didn't think. I ran, ducking behind the last pew on the left, heart pounding so loud I was sure whatever was coming could hear it. The candles blew out all at once. And then footsteps. Not heavy ones. Not human. Light, scraping, dragging steps. They clicked and scratched like claws across the stone floor, slow and deliberate. I saw nothing, but I felt it. Something wrong, something old. It passed by me. I could smell it, rotten earth and wet stone. I didn't breathe until it was gone. I don't even know if it ever was gone. Just no longer near. At 4 a.m. on the dot, the bells stopped. The candles relit on their own. The pressure in the room lifted. And I knew, without anyone needing to tell me, that if I had failed to hide, I would have never left that church alive. When I stepped outside, the world felt too bright, too normal. Like the night hadn't just tried to eat me whole. David was waiting by the edge of the tree line, hands in his pockets, smiling faintly. Well, he asked. I remembered Rule 6. If David asks what you saw, lie. So I smiled right back. Nothing much, I said. Just swept the floors. His smile widened. That's good, he said. That's very good. Then he turned and walked back into the woods, whistling an old hymn I didn't recognize. And I realized something else. I'd be back the next night. Because now, I needed to know what the hell this place really was. It was my third night at St. Elias Chapel, and I had already broken 2 of the posted rules. Not on purpose, not really. I didn't hide when the bells rang at 3:06 a.m. on my first night, and the second night I might have glanced at the children who weren't supposed to be there. Just long enough to see their mouths sewn shut, like someone wanted to stop them from screaming. But the mirror? That one felt different. It called to me. It hung at the end of the hallway behind the sanctuary, tucked away like an afterthought. Just an old, cracked thing in a tarnished brass frame. At first glance, it didn't seem important. It looked like it belonged in a dusty antique shop or a grandmother's hallway. But every time I walked past it, I felt a tug. Like gravity, but inside my brain. The rule was clear. Never look into the mirror after 2:13 a.m. I checked my watch. 2:12 a.m. I stood in front of the mirror. I stared at my reflection, messy dark hair, circles under my eyes, shirt stained with candle soot. Just me. Just Jason Mercer, night janitor in a cursed church. I almost laughed. Almost. The seconds ticked by louder than they should have. Like my watch wanted to warn me. 2:13 a.m. I didn't move. The change didn't happen all at once. It was slow, so slow I thought I was imagining it. My reflection stayed where it was, but my head tilted just slightly. I hadn't moved. But he had. I leaned closer. My reflection smiled. I did not. A cold rush poured down my spine, like someone cracked open my skin and poured ice water straight into my bones. I took a step back, heart thumping so loud it sounded like a drum in my ears. My reflection didn't step back. It stayed where it was, smiling. Then it blinked. It blinked first. I stumbled back until my shoulder hit the wall. I should have run. I knew I should have run. But I couldn't take my eyes off it. Jason. It said. My heart stopped. It didn't speak with sound. Its lips moved, but the voice, God help me, the voice was inside my head. Cold and quiet and wrong. Jason, you miss him, don't you? My brother. Caleb. I couldn't breathe. You know where he is? Just ask him. The reflection lifted its hand and pressed a finger to the glass. I stared, frozen, as a black crack spread from where the finger touched. It crawled outward like veins, spreading through the mirror's surface. The light in the hallway flickered. Then I heard it. A whisper from somewhere behind me. Jason, help me. Caleb's voice. I spun around. No one. Empty hallway. Just stone and silence, and the awful, creeping smell of damp earth. But when I turned back to the mirror, the hallway in the reflection was full of people. Dozens of them. All in robes, faces covered, standing behind me. Watching. Silent. I wasn't breathing. I couldn't. The reflection raised its hand and reached out. Not toward the glass, through it. The mirror rippled like water. I ran. I don't remember how far or how fast. I just remember the sound of my boots slapping the chapel floor, the whispering following me like wind, and that damn voice echoing in my skull. You've already broken the seal, Jason. When I reached the janitor's closet, I slammed the door shut and slid down to the floor, shaking, sweat pouring off me like I'd run a marathon. I stared at my hands. They were pale. My fingers wouldn't stop trembling. I checked my watch. 2:19 a.m. 6 minutes had passed. But it felt like hours. And when I finally worked up the courage to look out the narrow glass window in the closet door, the hallway was empty again. The mirror? Gone. It was somewhere around 2:40 in the morning, and I had just finished mopping the sanctuary floor for the second time that night. Dust never settled here the way it should. Things stayed clean longer than they should, or turned dirty without warning. The air always smelled faintly of stone and candle wax, with a whisper of something foul underneath, like meat left out too long. The laughter came again, echoing off the stained glass windows that hadn't let in sunlight for what felt like centuries. I turned slowly, mop in hand like some kind of weapon, though I knew it wouldn't help if it came to that. That's when I saw them. 2 children, a boy and a girl, sitting quietly in the third pew from the front. Heads down, hands folded. They looked like they'd stepped out of an old photograph, black shoes, pale skin, grayish clothes too formal for kids their age. I don't know how I missed them before. Maybe they hadn't been there until just now. My heart thudded hard against my ribs. The rules came back to me in a rush, uninvited and sharp as broken glass. Do not speak to the children if they appear. They didn't look threatening. They looked sad, small, out of place. The girl's hair was in 2 neat braids, tied with blue ribbon. The boy clutched what looked like a toy horse in his lap. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked at me. I stepped back slowly, trying not to breathe too loudly. Then the girl turned her head. Her eyes met mine. Huge, hollow, and dark, not empty exactly. Just wrong. As if they saw through me. Saw past me. And that's when I noticed their mouths. Sewn shut. Not figuratively. Not with metaphor. With actual black thread, looped crudely across pale lips like some butcher's cruel joke. Tiny knots bulged where the needle had gone in. My stomach turned, and my vision swam for a second. The boy tilted his head. I don't know how I knew it, but he was trying to speak. Trying to say something urgent. Something he couldn't. I forgot the rule. Are you okay? I asked, my voice hoarse and too loud in the dead silence of the chapel. That's when the air changed. It dropped 20 degrees in a breath. My skin prickled, and something behind me, a candle maybe, went out with a hiss. The floor trembled beneath my boots, just once, like something deep below the church had rolled in its sleep. The children didn't move. But I heard a creak. I spun around. The crucifix on the back wall, massive, iron and bolted tight, was swaying gently from side to side. The nails on Christ's hands were bleeding. Then the pews began to groan. Long, low, painful sounds, as if the wood itself was bending under some unseen weight. My mop clattered to the floor. A whisper curled through the air. Not a voice. Not language. Just the impression of a question. My brain tried to form meaning out of it and failed, like trying to hold smoke with bare hands. I stumbled backward, and my shoulders slammed into the wall. And the children stood. That was all. They didn't float or crawl or scream. They just stood, their heads tilted in perfect unison. And I knew, with a clarity that shot ice through my spine, that I was seconds away from something I wouldn't survive. That's when David appeared. No sound. No footsteps. He was just suddenly there, standing between me and the children, his arms raised like a priest conducting a silent prayer. The children didn't look at him. They just turned slowly and began to walk down the aisle toward the altar. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. David lowered his arms and turned to me. "You broke a rule," he said. His voice was quiet, disappointed, almost gentle. I tried to speak, but my throat was too tight. My knees gave out, and I sank to the cold stone floor, shaking. "They only come when the veil is thinning," he said. "You see them, you feel sorry for them. That's natural. But mercy is not your job here. Obedience is." He turned and walked away, as if that settled it. As if I hadn't nearly just died, or worse. I didn't ask what worse meant. The children were gone. The chapel was quiet again. But all I could think about was how they had looked at me. Like they'd been waiting. And now, maybe something else was, too. It was a little past 2:30 in the morning, and the air inside St. Elias felt wrong again. Too still, like it had forgotten how to move. I'd finished mopping the eastern hallway, and was about to call it a night, when I noticed something odd. The altar, massive, carved from dark stone, always cold to the touch, was slightly crooked. I don't know why I noticed. I've walked past that thing every night for weeks. But tonight, it felt off, like it had shifted just an inch to the left. Enough to bother my eyes. Enough to bother my gut. I set down my mop and walked up the center aisle. My boots echoed sharply on the stone floor, louder than usual, like the church wanted to make sure I heard myself coming. I reached the altar and crouched beside it, pressing my palm against the base. Cold. Still solid. Then my fingers found something, a seam. A crack in the floor beneath the altar, barely wider than a pencil. It hadn't been there before. It definitely shouldn't have been. My breath caught in my throat as I ran my fingers along it. The stone felt almost soft. Like old skin. I leaned closer, heart pounding. There, tucked along the edge of the seam, was a tiny iron ring. My hands trembled. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was both wearing the same mask. But I pulled the ring. With a low groan, like the church was waking up from a long, bitter dream, the altar shifted backward, revealing a square opening in the floor. A trapdoor, hidden beneath centuries of stone. No one had mentioned a basement. No one had said anything about a passage under the altar. No one ever says anything, Jason. That's the point. I took a flashlight from my belt and shined it down into the hole. A narrow stone staircase spiraled into darkness. The smell that rose up to meet me was old, wet, and foul, like rotting paper soaked in blood. I knew I should have walked away. Sealed the door. Pretended I never found it. Instead, I went in. The stairs groaned beneath me, worn smooth by time or footsteps I didn't want to think about. My flashlight flickered once, then again, and I whispered to it not to die on me now. I reached the bottom after what felt like forever. The room was a small, low-ceilinged chamber lit only by my beam. Shelves lined the stone walls, shelves packed with books. Hundreds of them, their pages yellowed and curled. Some bound in leather, others in cloth, a few in something I didn't want to identify. I stepped closer and pulled one out. The first page was handwritten. Cursive so tight and frantic it looked like the writer never lifted their pen. The journal belonged to someone named Gerald Fenn. Dated 1973. I have followed the rules for 16 nights. Last night, I broke one. The bells rang. I was too slow to hide. Something touched me, and now my skin smells like fire. David says the church accepts pain as payment, but I don't know what for. I don't know how much more I can give. I swallowed hard and flipped to the last page. It was stained, something dark, dry, and smudged in a shape that looked like a palm print. Do not trust David. He lied about the seal. He lied about the mouth. The children aren't trapped. They're guards. And the real rule, the one he didn't write, is this: if you hear them whisper your name, run. I dropped the book. It hit the floor with a heavy thump, kicking up dust. Something moved in the far corner. Just the creak of wood, maybe. Or maybe not. I pulled out another book. This one dated 1956. Then another. 1941, 1910. Each belonged to a different man or woman. Each one a caretaker. Each one slowly unraveling. All of them broke rules. All of them talked about the mouth beneath. Some believed it was a demon. Others called it a god. A few said it was older than either, something buried before language. Sealed in a knot of faith and blood beneath this very chapel. And David was in every journal. Sometimes as a guide. Sometimes as a threat. Always the same name. Always the same age. I backed away from the shelves, the books, the words I didn't want anymore. The flashlight trembled in my grip, and I noticed something on the wall. A symbol, etched deep into the stone like claw marks. It looked like an eye split down the middle. Beneath it, written in red. If you're reading this, the seal is already weakening. Something above me shifted. A soft thud, then the unmistakable sound of bare feet on stone. I turned off the flashlight and held my breath. They were walking across the chapel floor. But the door had been sealed behind me, hadn't it? I stayed still, silent, listening, counting the footsteps as they passed above. 1, 2, 3. A pause. Then a whisper from the trapdoor above. Jason. It wasn't a voice I knew, but it sounded like my brother, and it was coming from inside the church. The silence here isn't empty, it's heavy, like the air just before a tornado touches down. You can feel it pressing against your skin, making your bones hum. That night, I learned silence could scream. I had started my shift like usual, checking the pews, dusting off the hymnals that no one ever touched, pretending I didn't hear the whispers that curled up from the floorboards. But something felt different. The church was too still, like it was holding its breath. That's when I noticed it. The hallway behind the altar, where David always told me never to go, was cracked open just enough to tempt a man who should know better. I stood there for a long moment, debating whether to listen to reason or curiosity. But reason had packed its bags a long time ago. I slipped through the door. The hallway was narrow, lit by a single candle on a wrought iron sconce. The stone walls were slick with damp, and the air smelled of old incense and something sharp underneath, like blood that had dried centuries ago but refused to be forgotten. I moved quietly. My boots echoed in a slow rhythm. At the end of the corridor was a chamber I'd never seen before. Round. Dark. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with texts that looked like they belonged in a museum or a vault. And there in the center was David. He didn't see me. Not at first. He stood with his back to me, dressed in long black robes I'd never seen him wear. His hands were raised above his head. In them, he held a bone-white candle and what looked like a page torn from the Bible, but the text was backward, reversed like it had been written for a mirror. He chanted softly in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't any language I'd heard before. The words bent in my ears, curled like smoke through my head. They made my skin crawl. I should have left. But I stepped closer. That's when he spoke directly to the floor. Keeper of the mouth. Guardian of the gate. I bind thee in ash, in oil and blood. He poured something thick and black onto the ground. It moved on its own, crawling into a perfect circle. You will remain, he continued, his voice low but firm. So long as the rules are followed. So long as the sacrifice returns. I must have gasped because David turned around. His eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, I saw something behind them. Something not entirely human. He didn't flinch. He didn't scold. Instead, he smiled. Jason, he said calmly, like we'd just run into each other at a grocery store. Curiosity will unmake you. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat had gone dry. What is this place? I managed. This, he said, gesturing to the chamber, is the heart of the chapel. The pulpit behind the pulpit. The reason for the rules. You're not a priest, I said. No, he admitted. Not anymore. He stepped closer. The candlelight danced across his face, casting long shadows under his cheekbones and eyes. You've felt it, haven't you? The pressure in the air. The eyes that aren't there. The voice that calls you by name when no one is around. I've seen things, I whispered. Things that shouldn't exist. David nodded. And yet, you keep coming back. Why me? He paused, as if deciding whether I deserved the truth. Then he said, because you've been touched by death. Because you're fractured. Because something inside you is already broken. The chapel, it looks for people like that. I backed away slowly. What's beneath the church? David's face darkened. Don't ask questions you're not prepared to die for. But I had already asked. So he gave me an answer. There is something beneath this chapel that hungers. It is ancient, older than the wood, the stone, even the word. And it doesn't want to be sealed anymore. My stomach turned. So what are the rules really for? They are not to protect you, Jason, David said, voice cold. They are to protect it from being disturbed. Every broken rule feeds it, strengthens it, and one day someone will break them all. He stepped past me, leaving me standing alone in the chamber. But that won't be me, I said. David looked over his shoulder. His smile didn't reach his eyes. No, he said. It already is. And then he was gone. The candle flickered out, and I was left alone with the silence that wasn't silence anymore. It was breathing. My watch ticked louder than my heartbeat. 3:59. I was standing by the altar, mop in hand, pretending like I was still doing my job. But truth be told, I hadn't cleaned a thing in the last hour. The broom hadn't moved. My hands were shaking too badly to hold anything steady. David was gone. He'd walked out an hour ago without a word. No nod, no warning. Just a look. Like he knew something I didn't. Like he'd already made peace with what was about to happen. There was only one rule I hadn't broken. Don't stay past 4 a.m. That rule wasn't on the paper taped to the janitor closet. I'd read those damn rules 100 times. This one I learned the hard way, from an old journal I found behind the organ pipes, written in scratchy penmanship and smeared ink. It belonged to someone named Dennis. He was the janitor here before me. The last entry in his journal said, if you break the last rule, you don't leave. You don't die either. You just keep hearing the bells. The clock hit 4 a.m. and the bells didn't ring. I expected them, wanted them even. I'd gotten used to their rhythm, as twisted as that sounds. But tonight, the silence kept on growing, stretching, filling every corner of the church until it felt like the air was too thick to breathe. Then I heard something else. Whispering. It didn't come from the pulpit or the confession booth. It came from under the floorboards. A low murmur, like someone praying, only faster. Desperate. Like it was trying to speak every word in the Bible in one breath. I dropped the mop. My legs moved on their own. I stepped up to the altar and ran my fingers along the edge of the wood until I found the seam I remembered. A part of the floor that didn't quite fit right. I pried it open. Underneath was the hatch. I'd seen it once before. Back in chapter 5. The hidden door that led into the belly of the church. Last time, I only peeked. I wasn't ready then. But I was now. Because I wasn't here to clean anymore. I was here to find the truth. I pulled the hatch open. It groaned like something alive. A gust of cold, damp air rose up and curled around my face like fingers. The whispering grew louder. I hesitated, gripping the flashlight in my coat pocket. One last glance at my watch. 4:01 a.m. I dropped down into the dark. The stone tunnel beneath the chapel was narrow and old. The walls were carved with symbols I couldn't read, scratched deep into the rock like claw marks. As I walked, the light from my flashlight flickered, even with fresh batteries. Something didn't want to be seen. The whispers turned into voices. Familiar ones. One of them was my brother's. Jason. I stopped dead. The tunnel stretched ahead, a throat of darkness, and from somewhere inside it, I heard him again. Jason, why didn't you come get me? My chest tightened. I wanted to believe. So bad. I wanted it to be him. I wanted to run down that tunnel, follow that voice, grab his hand and drag him out of whatever place this was. But I knew better. I knew what this place did. It mimicked. It lied. It peeled your memories apart and put them on like a mask. So I kept walking. Slower now. At the end of the tunnel was a chamber lit by a single candle. And in the center of that flame stood David. He wasn't surprised to see me. I told you not to stay, he said calmly, as if we were in a coffee shop, not standing above something ancient and angry. You didn't tell me the last rule, I said. He smiled without joy. Some rules aren't written down. They're felt. Like dread. like guilt. I looked past him. There was something behind the altar in this hidden chamber. A pit. A hole in the ground so black. I knew the night was different the moment I stepped inside St. Elias. The air was heavier, thicker, like breathing through wet cloth. The clock on the wall ticked past 4 a.m., but the usual quiet didn't settle in. Instead, a low, distant rumble vibrated beneath my feet, barely audible but impossible to ignore. I hadn't followed the rules tonight. I spoke to the children in the pews, looked into the mirror after 2:13, and told David everything I'd seen. I wasn't afraid anymore. Maybe I was stupid, but the fear had finally snapped like a broken chain. The bells rang, slow and deep, sounding out 4:01. The room grew colder, the shadows lengthened and stretched like living things. Then the floor beneath the altar cracked open. It wasn't a normal crack, more like the church itself was tearing apart. The stone split wide to reveal a dark hole, a gaping maw lined with something that looked like bone and flesh. It wasn't just a hole, it was a mouth. My heart hammered so loud I thought it might burst. The smell hit me then, rotten and metallic, like blood mixed with earth and something worse. I wanted to run, but my legs were frozen in place. A voice whispered from the darkness, low, hungry, and endless. It called my name, wrapping around my mind like thick smoke. Then I was falling, or maybe sinking, into a world I couldn't understand. Images flashed behind my closed eyes, my brother's face, pale and hollow. I saw him standing at the altar just like me, the same worn janitor uniform, but his eyes were empty, lost. Then came the truth, sharp and cruel. He had died here, trapped in the ritual. His sacrifice was the price paid to keep this mouth sealed. David's voice echoed in my head. He wasn't just a man. He was a guardian, a jailer, a servant to something far older and crueler than I imagined. He said I was chosen because my grief made me vulnerable. I was meant to be the next sacrifice. I wanted to scream, but the darkness swallowed my voice. The mouth opened wider, cold breath blowing across my skin like a winter wind. It promised reunion with my brother if I let it in. It promised freedom from this pain, this endless night. But then, through the haze, I heard my brother's voice. It was soft, almost pleading, but there was something wrong, something too perfect, too fake. It wasn't him. It was the mouth copying, mocking the love I held onto. I clenched my fists and pushed back. I remembered a prayer from long ago, half forgotten but still alive in my bones. I whispered it into the darkness, steady and firm, calling on a light I wasn't sure still existed. The mouth hissed and recoiled. The walls shook, the floor trembled, but the crack didn't close. The seal was broken, but not destroyed. I was alone in the ruins of the church, breathing hard, knowing that whatever I fought tonight was only waiting for the next rule to be broken, for the next soul to fall. And I was the one who broke it first. The air in the chapel had turned thick, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. The cracked floor beneath me pulsed slowly, as if the earth itself was alive and watching. Darkness spilled out of that mouth below, thick and black, swallowing every ounce of light until all I could see was the faint outline of David's face. His eyes were calm, but empty, like he'd seen too much and cared too little. Then the voice came. Not David's, but something deeper, something older. It spoke directly inside my head, soft but cold. It called me by name, Jason. The sound wasn't human. It was 1,000 voices twisted into one, whispering promises I didn't want to hear but couldn't ignore. It said it knew about my brother, about the night he died, about the pain I still carry like a stone in my chest. The entity promised me reunion, an impossible second chance, if I would only open the door and let it loose on this world. The words wrapped around me like chains, tempting me with everything I'd lost. I felt the weight of my grief tighten its grip, begging me to believe, to trust that this dark thing could fix the broken pieces inside me. For a moment, I wanted to fall into that lie. I wanted to hear my brother's voice again, to see his face one last time. But then I remembered the mirror, the smile that didn't belong to me, the children with sewn mouths, the stories scribbled in that hidden library. None of it was real. It was a trick, a mimic trying to feed off my pain. If I let it in, the world wouldn't be saved. It would be destroyed. I pushed back, trembling. My voice barely a whisper. I recited the prayer I learned years ago, the one I thought I'd forgotten. Each word felt like a shard of light stabbing into the darkness around me. The chapel shook, the floor groaned, and the mouth below hissed in anger. The entity recoiled, retreating into its lair with a scream that shook my bones. The seal held, for now. But I knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks grew bigger. David's face faded, and I was alone again,